Hi, mom entrepreneurs. Welcome to the Good Enough Mompreneur podcast. If you are new here, my name is Angela. I'm the host of this podcast, but I'm also a certified confidence coach and a business coach to mom entrepreneurs and female entrepreneurs. So thank you so much for joining me on this episode. We're going to be talking about such an important topic today that I really feel like is probably the number one issue that women and especially moms have to overcome for personal fulfillment and business success, and that's codependency, and it really can eat away at our business success and our confidence. So let's dive in. But before we do, it's important for me to have the disclosure that I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a doctor. These are my own opinions as someone who is a recovering people pleaser. My whole life I've dealt with and didn't know that I was exhibiting a lot of codependent behaviors and how much it was eating away at my fulfillment and my success. And so overcoming these things and being able to share them with you and help to open your mind and open your heart to how adapting to some new behaviors can really just help you level up your life and your business. Let's dive in and talk about the impact of codependency in our life and in our business. First of all, let's talk about ways that codependency can show up for us as moms and entrepreneurs. And it usually shows up as a lot of overcommitment and a lot of burnout. Do you know that mom? I used to be that mom who overcommitted, who had to be on every volunteer board. It raised my hand for every volunteer position, everything that somebody needed. And it led to a lot of burnout. And I didn't realize that it was a big source of a lot of unhappiness and a lot of resentment. That sometimes I would have about all of the obligations or the pressure and the responsibility that I felt. So micromanagement or team disempowerment can be another sign of codependency. Self-neglect, not doing those self-care things to take care of you before you take care of everybody else. Resentment and frustration, a very common theme in codependency, and inability to set boundaries. And personally, I don't think I knew what boundaries were a couple of years ago, honestly, unless something was really egregious. And I really like to keep in mind now that I've learned about boundaries that we're constantly teaching other people how to treat us. And so if we just are constantly saying yes to everything, that does tell people a message about us. Having decision paralysis, client or employee over-dependency or over-reliance. Like if you have a few clients that you really rely on, and if you no longer serve them anymore, it would be devastating to your business. Or if you over-relied on a certain employee, or you're not really able to set boundaries with that employee, you know you need to make a change, but you don't, that can be a sign of codependency as well. And a need for validation of others for self-worth. And lots of times you don't realize that you're doing this, it's self-conscious, but that can definitely look like constant achievements and not celebrating your wins just for the approval and the accolades of others that in turn give you a sense of self-worth. Difficulty delegating. How many of you have been in a job interview and said, oh, my biggest weakness is that I want to do everything myself and I have a hard time delegating. Yep, that can be a codependency sign. Overwhelm and stress, that goes hand in hand with the resentment and the frustration. Isolation, because you feel you have to do everything. Nobody does it as good as you. and perfectionism or fear of failure. And this is not a comprehensive list, of course, but these are some ways. If you found yourself nodding and go, I'm sure every mom and woman listening can probably identify with one or all of these. And I certainly can identify with all of them. So that's why I find it so important, as somebody who has done a lot of work on recovering from codependency, to share any tips that I have to help you recover from that as well. So let's talk about a definition of codependency. And I think that that's really important, because I used to think I understood what codependency was, but I realize in recent past that I really didn't have a good understanding about what codependency was. And I'm going to leave a link to where I got this from. It's from Psychology Today, which I know is by no means the most esteemed psychological reference, but it's a good start. And so codependency is defined in this article as a dysfunctional relationship dynamic where one person assumes the role of the giver, which is so many moms and so many women. We've been conditioned to be the caretaker, which is admirable, but we often overfunction and give too much, sacrificing their own needs and well-being for the sake of the other, the taker. The bond in question doesn't have to be romantic. It can occur just as easily between parent and child, friends and family members, co-workers, clients, as I described. It really is an interrelational issue that can occur with any relationship. So if you're familiar with any of the mental health diagnoses, references like the DSM-5, codependency is not a diagnosis, although there are many mental health professionals that say it should be. It currently is not. I'm recording this, and I think the DSM-5 is the current mental health diagnosis reference. So how does codependency manifest as some of these seemingly positive traits, which I think really perpetuates codependency? And it can look like somebody who is the helper. We don't want to be perceived as rude. We don't want to be perceived as not nice. We don't want to be perceived as unhelpful or uncaring, especially as moms. Like, what if we're perceived as uncaring? Then we're bad moms, right? So that is one way. But as an entrepreneur, codependency can also look like constantly trying to accomplish things because of a sense of inadequacy. And I really think about this reference that my trauma recovery group would talk about, this trying to out-achieve your trauma. And so that's something that definitely is a result of codependency, when you have this sense that's often subconscious of inadequacy. Then you're constantly trying to achieve the next thing and the next thing to get the accolades of others to feed your sense of worthiness. So what are some of the ways that we can begin to distinguish between something that you do out of the goodness of your heart or altruistic, or is a codependent behavior? So how can we distinguish between the two? And altruistic behavior, or out of the goodness of your heart, is motivated by a genuine desire to help others without expecting anything in return. Not likes, not comments, not a medal, not an award, leading to fulfillment and happiness while maintaining healthy boundaries. But codependency, on the other hand, is driven by a need for approval and validation, often resulting in resentment and burnout due to poor boundary setting and reliance on external validation for self-worth. And so This is how codependency can actually really eat away at our confidence. And I think it's so important. I'll leave my link in the show notes below to my free mini course, 5 Keys to Confidence. But in that, I talk about how my definition of self-doubt honestly is a disconnection with self. And so you begin to connect with yourself again and start to shed this external validation need. Then you start to connect more with yourself, and then your confidence starts to build. Pursuing your own goals can be a really great way. Not having goals that you think other people want you to achieve, but really getting a sense of what do you want? What do you want to achieve? That is one way that you can start to combat this codependent behavior. And so ask yourself before you're doing something that might be feeling a little icky, feeling like it's causing you some stress, and you're not really sure if you're doing it for an altruistic reason or a codependent reason. Is it rooted in people pleasing? I had situations, so many, where I felt the obligation, I felt the responsibility to do things for other people at the sake of my own health, my mental health, my physical health, and the happiness of my family at times. And lots of times this can look like going to family events you really don't want to go to, but you feel obligated to, things like that. But are your accomplishments driven by healthy goals or a need to compensate for inadequacy? And these can be really hard questions to answer if you're not working with a coach or a mental health provider, because so many of these motivations are subconscious. So working with somebody on this can be really helpful to seeing that. The role in self-esteem in helping erode this codependent behavior is so important, because it's really the key to overcoming codependency. Low self-esteem honestly drives the codependent behavior, and it becomes like this vicious cycle. So let's talk about some practical tips and how you can start to overcome some of the codependent behaviors other than the couple of little questions that I talked about. One is affirmations, and I'm going to specify that they have to be daily and they have to be specific. They have to be grounded in your truth, and you have to be consistent about it. So when you're feeling that anxiety, when you're feeling that self-doubt, when you're feeling less than, that's when you need to be doing the affirmations, if you're not just scheduling it every day as part of your morning routine or your bedtime routine. Exercising some self-compassion, which really starts with mindfulness and awareness of the critical self-talk. I do an exercise with my clients that's really helpful about this critical self-talk, but beginning to stop yourself when and noticing without judgment. That's really important. I've learned that so much in trauma therapy. We begin to judge ourselves about our feelings and our thoughts and our emotions. So try to be mindful of that and just observe how you're feeling and what's going on. But trying to rewrite the story that you're telling yourself. Setting goals and celebrating your achievements. Are you just moving on to goal after goal after goal, or are you really stopping to celebrate your hard work and who you are and the hard work that you put into actually accomplishing some of the things that I'm sure you are accomplishing? Creating a support network of people who really get you and really support you and really want to see you succeed, who are not critical, who are going to give you some really constructive feedback, but aren't playing the role of the taker. I've definitely had to shift friend relationships that I was no longer aligned with because I was fulfilling that codependent role where I was giving everybody advice and doing everything for everybody for free a lot of the time, at the sacrifice of my own mental health and my own schedule and my family schedule. So journaling can be really powerful as a part of that mindfulness and the affirmations. Actually, writing affirmations in your own handwriting can be really powerful. So what I'm going to do in the show notes below, I am going to include a list of affirmations that would be great for you. You can write them yourself. I've actually heard this new tip recently where if you record yourself saying the affirmations, that is even more powerful. One of the most important things I think every codependent person struggles with is self-care, and prioritizing finding what that thing is that is for you, that fills your bucket, that helps you serve other people. A guest loves roller derby, putting puzzles together, just taking a walk in nature. Whatever it is that is just yours and that you love, and sometimes it's having your business. That is a form of self-care. You just have to have healthy boundaries with it. But just having something that yours can be really powerful as a mom, especially when you're taking so much care of everybody else. So I want to leave you with an inspiring quote from Melody Beatty. Don't forfeit your self-esteem to another's disapproval or rejection of who you are or what you have done. Even if the most important person in your world rejects you, you are still real and you are still okay. So reflect on what that means to you. Especially one way that codependency can really show up is if you're struggling for social media content and worried about what somebody's going to think of a video that you do or a post that you created, or you're trying to create that perfect post that you think that marketing person that you connected with will approve of. Those are all things that mom entrepreneurs struggling with codependency do. And so reflect on that quote and think about ways where you may be really trying to do things for others' approval. And so let's wrap up this episode with a few final points. One, I have to thank guest Bronwyn Schweigert, who was on the podcast, and she's the host of Angry at the Right Things. And after our conversation, she mentioned that she wanted to know my opinion of her episode on codependency, which is actually one of her most popular episodes, and I definitely can understand why. I'm going to leave a link to that episode in the show notes because it's very enlightening, and she has a very interesting perspective on anger. And she too knows so much about codependency, and she sees it with her clients as a psychologist. Let's talk about a few other things. I think it's really important to know too, we talked about, codependents often recovering people pleasers. They often struggle with self-criticism, and they have a tendency to beat themselves up. But in that kind of thought, I think it's really important to understand the source of so much of our codependency. And we shouldn't blame ourselves for codependent behaviors, because codependency is so often stemming from unmet developmental needs in childhood. I really want to encourage you, if you're identifying with this conversation and going, oh my gosh, I have these behaviors, to not beat yourself up about it. So learning to set boundaries really can help you break that cycle of codependency. And a great book on understanding more about codependency is called Facing Codependence by Pia Melody, and I'll leave a link in the show notes to that. But it really can help you understand it more, its causes, and the impact on our lives. But I'm really thinking about doing a workshop on this because I just think it's so important, and it's such an issue that so many women and so many moms struggle with because we are taught to be nurturers, and we often are not taught healthy boundaries and creating healthy boundaries. I just want to encourage you that if anything is resonating with you in this conversation, that working with a coach can be really helpful. So I'll leave a link to apply to work with me if that's something you're interested in the show notes below. But we have a new podcast episode every Monday, and every other week I do a solo episode. And in a few weeks, we have some master boundary setters. They're the author of a book on setting boundaries. So that is a really great episode. You want to make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss that episode. And then, yeah, if you found this episode resonated with you, and you found it helpful and enlightening, please connect with me over at mombusinesscoach.com. You'll find all of my social media links there. I would love to hear from you. And like I said, I have thought about putting a workshop together on this topic. So if that's something you would like to be part of, let me know, because it's something that I definitely see so many people need, because once you have started to recover from codependency, you can really start to see a lot of the codependent behaviors around you. So thank you so much for joining me on this solo episode, and I can't wait to talk to you next time. And be sure to connect with me over at mombusinesscoach.com. Talk to you next time. Bye.